Welcome to the Ocean Tribe Hangout, where we chat with water humans from across the world. We focus on passion, representation, and most importantly, inspiring the world to venture into the most beautiful place, the ocean. Let's
Hello,
tuck in.
everybody.
Hello, how are you?
I'm awesome. How are you?
Cold but good. Cold but good. Yeah.
How cold is it in Cape Town at the moment? Is it like super freezing?
Like all the bones in my body are cold, like on the inside. Yeah. And by you guys, is it quite warm or also cold?
We had like a very warm day, and then when it gets like into nighttime, it gets a little bit cold. So even now, it's not like super freezing. It's just a little bit cold, but like not intense. So,
Okay, that's cool.
welcome to the live. Thank you for agreeing to come
Thank
and chat
you.
with us.
Thank you for having me. It feels weird to be on the other side of the screen, like the bottom half of the screen. I'm used to being the host. Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with you. Tell us what's your thing. Like, I love the discussion that talks about what is your thing, what is your love, what is your purpose, your passion, your waking up, bones in my body, wake up vibe. What is it?
Oh, that's hard to say, especially recently. It's been so hard to get out of bed. Um, but I think that's normal. And for me, as a marine biologist, that's always been my passion. Not just like the dolphins and the whales. And I think it was Roslyn that we had a live with once, and she's like, often you get drawn in by the dolphins and the whales, but there's so much more, about the sea that's interesting. And I think growing up around or on the coast, I spent so much time like exploring the coast and seeing all the curious little things and cutting things open and for me, like, I find the sea fascinating, and I always have. And obviously as I grew, my interaction with it grew as I learned to swim and then surf and then scuba dive and then free dive, and so I think for me that's a huge part of it. But more than that is sharing it with people. I love going for a dive with Nelson, with my friends. I love saying to people, come dive with us, or when you're in Cape Town, let me know and we'll go to the sea. For me, I think that's a huge thing. And that's like what our business is built around, essentially, is taking people to the sea.
Yeah. So you're pretty much saying that the sea has always been in your life. Like from a little human, you've just always been in the sea, and you've always been comfortable in the sea, and the natural thing then became marine biology because you'd always been in the space.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a house across the road from the sea, and we had this huge, massive window, where there should have been a wall. And it wasn't a fancy house, it wasn't a big house, but we were very, very lucky. It was in a previously, I think, like a previously white neighborhood. I'm not sure, I could be wrong. But, we were super lucky to be there. And yeah, we'd go to the beach a lot. And my mum was always the swimmer. She grew up inland, but obviously moved to the coast when she married my dad. And she was always, we'd go to the beach and she'd swim far out into the water. And yeah, to some degree, I think I got that bit of fearlessness from her.
Wow. I love that so much. So now you say that this whole journey leads you to being a marine biologist. Tell us what you do, but also, tell us, what does it mean to be a marine biologist? Like, what does that mean?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's, you have to have a passion for science, not just the sea. And by science, I mean, you have to be dedicated to, research and finding or answering questions, or having an open mind. And as a scientist, you have to be prepared to be wrong. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of scientists even battle with. For me currently, my work is so exciting because it's not just about the biology and the ecology, it's about the social aspect. So we're working with like some local communities in Mozambique, and like really trying to understand their connection to the environment and their conservation measures, that sort of thing. So that's been a huge learning curve. So I always battle to classify myself as just a marine biologist because, I mean, even with nature, everything is so interconnected. You know, you work not just with the sea, you work sometimes in freshwater. You work not just with biology, you work sometimes with, sociology or social science, whatever you call it. So yeah, I'd say the main focus is marine biology, but I'm learning so much about people and from people, you
Yeah.
know, as opposed to my traditional undergrad and postgrad training, which was just animals. Yeah.
It's actually interesting that you say that you're also learning from other people. Everyone is always like intimidated by the educational aspect, like people who are like high academics. Like this morning,
Yes.
I had a chat with a team of oceanographers, and to be honest, I was so intimidated because everyone's like mass academics, and to hear an academic say, I also go into the community to learn, but also you
Yeah.
need to be prepared to be wrong. That's so just incredible, right?
Yeah.
I I
No,
see I see Tanya also says she shares the same sentiment as you.
that's cool. It's been, I think one of the most rewarding things has been finding people that share that sentiment or finding people that have something to offer, right? And you're talking about, being intimidated almost by academics or, these high-ranking academics. But like the biggest lessons I've learned have not been from academics at all. I mean, maybe, there were a couple, like my supervisor, who I was with I actually worked in his lab from my second year all the way till my postdoc, the end of my postdoc. And I learned a lot from him. But the stuff that I'm learning is not from academics, it's from other people. It's from
Sure.
people that are part of these small fishing communities or people that are doing work like Shamir, for instance. I learned so much from Shamir, and he's one of those people I think that's not afraid to like have a different opinion, and often although academia is supposed to be like a questioning, debating thing, you find that it's lost that a lot because if you disagree too loudly, especially with higher ranking academics, then you kind of like the odd one out. So people
Yeah.
just sort of form, after a while.
So I'm actually thinking about, there's a lady called Zolega that I follow, and when she shares,
Yes,
she often says that, especially when you come from academia, people tend to throw out their academics that makes them the authority on discussion, and versus being
absolutely, yeah.
open to the people in the space also leading the discussion, which is a very interesting thing. And it seems like you share that space that says, I might be the academic, but I don't arrive in a conversation looking to be right or looking to be the authority, which is pretty cool.
Yes, yeah. True, and I mean it's not something you learn as an undergrad. You're taught to, build yourself up. It's competitive out there, like, and you move forward with this imposter syndrome so often, but you're taught like you are the authority.
Sure.
And moving to Mozambique for me was that lesson that, okay, like stop, listen, ask, first. Don't just assume, don't just come here to teach, you know. Step into a room and listen
Yeah.
first. So yeah,
And
I agree with on that like 100%,
sure.
you know.
I think for me, I definitely have to say it's been so humbling coming across you, and obviously we're inspired by the work that you do, but also it's been so humbling to come across someone who's in the marine sciences but is so down to earth and is a
Ooh,
person first, right? Like
right, yes.
you're a
Yeah.
person first, and in every single encounter, you meet Nasreen before you meet the scientist, which is beautiful because it means that your work has not become you. There's still you, and then there's an aspect of your work, which is incredible.
Yeah. I actually read something the other day. I think it might have been a tweet, and it was like, if you weren't allowed to talk about your work, how would you introduce yourself? And I've been thinking about that, and it's like, do we, a lot of scientists, and I may be guilty of it as well, like we that is us, right? We are the scientist and we are the authority. But exactly what you're saying, how are you as a person? Are you a good person? Are you an interesting person? Are you a kind person before you are the scientist? You know, and I feel like recently or in the last few years, that's becoming increasingly important to me as well.
Yeah. So tell us, is the marine biology career space, is it very diversified?
Um, Not
And
yet. I mean,
by diversity, I mean by representation.
yeah. I would say it's an interesting case in that we have, firstly, in terms of gender, I'd say it's quite female dominated actually, in South Africa specifically.
Wow.
In terms of race, we still have a long way to go. Certainly there is diversification and there's a lot of interest, and you're starting to see an increase in diversity, but we have a long way to go. Like if I think about my third year class at the moment, there are, out of a class of 60, there are 4 students of color, you know. Um, so we have a long way to go. And Zuleika likes my beanie. Thanks, Zuleika.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons, one of the motivations for me to stick around in academia is to make that space more accessible, to help students. Because I mean, often you get, and I've seen it, you sit on MSc or PhD panels and there's immediately a bias, right? It's like, she's not white, so this is not right, or she obviously doesn't have an understanding. And you can tell by the language that the panel, the reviewers use, And for me to be a part of that space and to actively change it, or to say, no, I don't think that's the case. When you consider where she comes from, she's actually done a remarkable job. You can see she's a fast learner. Just as an example, you have to change the narrative in order to change or to help the field become more diverse. Because I mean, I can rant about it endlessly. I can write blog post after blog post. But if I'm not changing anything, what's the point? Why am I ranting? I'm raising awareness for who? Like, who's gonna do what? Yeah.
That's actually that's actually so intense, because you're raising a discussion that I've been having with a lady by the name of Katie. And I often say, when it comes to like the diving space, the ownership of the sea and the authority of the narrative is white. So it's almost like, when you attend a webinar, whatever it is, when people are talking about the ocean, there's never black or brown people. That voice is never there. And it obviously bugs me, because I like to see myself represented. It talks about the space being diverse and rich in views, because we can't only be having one discussion. So as you're saying, I've stayed in academia largely because I also need to change the narrative. And it's standing there and pretty much saying, even though when I'm received, sometimes, someone said body language. So you say, everyone says, this is not right, but someone just said you pick it up in the body gestures as well. And
Definitely.
and being a brown woman in the space, it's almost like there's the whole narrative and standing your ground. So you kind of stand there and you say, well, that's right, which is important. And it encourages me as we're having this discussion.
For sure. It's interesting you say that, because Zuleika and I actually, I'm sorry, Zuleika, I'm just using your name here. But we had this discussion because it was World Oceans Day about a month ago. And there was quite a well-known organization that had a lineup of speakers. And I think she kind of alerted me to it, and she pointed it out to them. And I followed up because, we have to support each other. And I think with the whole, recently, like the Black Lives Matter movement, stuff like that, something that's becoming a bit dangerous is that people are learning to say, okay, I admit that I'm wrong, and I'm open to learning. but that's it. Because, you know, the organization kind of messaged us and they were like, thank you for pointing it out. You know, we are more diverse, but, you know, we are open to learning. So any suggestions you may have. And that immediately makes it your job to fix the whole organization.
Yeah.
So, you know, even in my role as a lecturer at Stellenbosch, as part of the department, it's not my job to, although I can try change the space for students, it's not my job to make the department look good or to fix their issue. They now have to hire professionals because it's such a large-scale, long-term history of like oppression. They actually need professional help to, you know, change the narrative. And to make, as Zuleika said, make it not just diverse, but inclusive. So you also have to be careful. Great, it's great that we've got allies. It's great that people are willing to listen. Sorry, but don't take on their work. You know,
100%.
people ask you for suggestions. Make sure you are in a space where you can give those suggestions, and not that it's taking from you. If that makes sense.
Like, you just like properly preached, because in any, and you're right, it is dangerous, because in any and every space, when you say, hey, something's not right with that, or hey, something's not right with that, the responsibility, the moment says, I hear you, what do you suggest we do? And the question says, you need to also be doing your own work as an organization that says, how do we become better, and how do we better support Black and brown communities in the work that we're doing? How do we not only become diverse, but be inclusive in how we communicate and in how we carry ourselves, right?
For sure, for sure. And I mean, it's not that you shouldn't have the conversation. It's not that it's, and I was having this chat with Nelson actually the other day. It's like, it's not that, you know, expect nothing from me in the conversation. It's that have the conversation. Don't just expect a monologue or a lecture from me, you know, or a lesson. Yeah.
So I'm popping into the comments. Everyone, please just send us some hearts if you're seeing us, and if you've got any questions, pop them in. Tanya was saying, okay, she was saying I share the same sentiment. Lady Leal says, I love the social interaction that you have with people as well as the ocean. Naz, it looks like the whole world is like excited by you.
Layla is another remarkable person. She's also a scientist, and she does such cool work. And I don't know if you caught her live with us, but she's like one of those people that's always going to be supporting you, and she's always just there for you, you know.
Sure.
So yeah, she's awesome as well.
This is important. As Zolega says, the more you work out of your bubble and engage with different stakeholders, it teaches you to listen, which I think echoes on the discussion when we were talking about you moving to Mozambique and learning to walk into the space and listen versus being the chiquita who is the knower of all things. The Cyrene Project says, thank you for this honest and important conversation. And everyone,
they're also quite cool. They highlight a lot of, they highlight a lot of like women of the sea as well. They're quite a cool page that I followed recently.
Yeah, I also follow them. I'm actually quite excited to see what more work they're doing. Zolega says she needs that beanie. Where did you get your beanie? Are you going to tell us where you got your beanie so we all know where to get it?
My dad bought it for me. My dad not anymore, but like he'd go on a business trip and he'd always bring me back something quirky. So like the one time it was my yellow field raincoat that I absolutely loved. The one time it was this hat. Yeah, stuff like that. So
is it the raincoat that you have on in your profile picture?
That's the one, yeah.
Let me see. Kevin says, hello, beautiful people. Rosalind is also here for the beanie. Shamir says, incredible woman, amazing role models. Thank you so much. Zolega is talking about...
we were saying nice about him.
Nasiba says, it's amazing to listen to you, Nasreen. I was wondering when I would have you as the talker, and my dream is being fulfilled. Yay!
Nasiba is in Mozambique as well, and I think she works for the Wildlife Conservation Society, also doing some cool work. And yeah, I would like to hang out with her more when I go to Mozambique. So I need to look her up.
So much of awesomeness. And Zolega comes back to say diversity versus inclusivity. Sure, that's deep. It's their responsibility. Again, when we talk about diversity, it's the responsibility of the organization to also it's their responsibility to make the change. And I actually echo what you were saying earlier, that it's not to say that you become silent, but to say that you also need to measure the pressure that you take in whatever responses you give. And the reminder that at any point, one Black person or one brown person can't speak for a whole community. Do you understand
100%.
what I mean? So
Yes.
if you're doing the work, you're able to be, and I mean, that is often the challenge, where when you are a minority in a space, it is assumed that you are able to speak for the collective, which is not fair. And I think it's kind of keeping an eye on that and being careful about the danger in that. Shamir said, I don't quite understand the part of the body gestures. I think I missed the context. Naz,
Right.
can you explain for us?
Yeah, so Shamir, we were talking about specifically in an academic sense, when you have a master's or PhD student that's presenting something, and how the language used, in the language used by the reviewers, you can see the bias sometimes. And then Zuleka added to that, saying that in the body gestures as well. And it's something I see often in a like a seminar room, you know, it's the way that people are busy on their laptops when the person is speaking, or they're sitting, you know, kind of to the side, or, you know, I won't get into it, but that was the context of the body gesture thing.
Okay, and I see, and who else is in here? Gabby says, you guys are so inspiring. This is so cool. And Nasiba says, yes, we look forward to meeting you too. I'm not sure where that is. Okay, so Shamir is clarified. Okay, Naz, tell us, how do we get more Black and brown people into the ocean? So into the ocean sciences. So like, if we have to look at myself, I didn't grow up next to the ocean. I only really got to experience it in 2016, and I'm over 30 now. So essentially, even if there was an opportunity to go back, which there always is an opportunity to go back, but what would happen if, you know, 20 years later, 20 years earlier, someone had pitched up and shown me? But so I think for me, that's a big question. How do we get more Black and brown people into ocean sciences? Also considering that, you know, we grow up, like, there's always been a fear around water in my life. And and then going into the ocean, and are you with us?
I'm with you.
Okay, awesome. So, like, how do we get more students? I mean, you're saying that you've got 4 students of color in a class of 60. You know, we're making a change, but is the change fast enough? And what else could we do? Like, what else is there?
Okay, before I answer that, I want to ask if you managed to catch that documentary, the 10-minute documentary, Pefumla. It was, I'll share the link with you, and it was actually part of, I think it was a NUF, so NUF is like nature, environmental, and wildlife filmmaking. And they had like a retreat in Sodwana, and they made a short documentary, and it follows it's narrated by Loyiso Dunga, and he tells his story as a marine scientist of his journey into the marine sciences, and how it was also a fear, and how it was also kind of like a taboo thing. I wouldn't say taboo, but like, you know, like, why are you doing this kind of thing? And if you haven't watched it, I highly recommend that you do. I'll actually put the link in my profile after this, so you can catch it. It was on 50/50, so you may have to skip to like minute 25 or something, but definitely it was so breathtaking. Like, you know, I was transported. In 10 minutes, I was transported. But to answer that question, we are having such a huge challenge at the moment with funding. Okay, so you have students that are interested. I have students that message me like once a month saying, can I please do a master's? Can I please do a PhD? But funding is such a huge issue. And our main funding institution, the National Research Foundation, they're having massive budget cuts.
Sure.
So I have had like sleepless nights stressing about my students for next year. And, because even those that are going to be funded, the funding has now been reduced and it's being monitored. So I think a huge thing we need to tackle is funding. And even if we approach private firms and it's private bursaries, we need to make that funding available to students so that they can actually pursue these degrees. Because what happens now is if they don't have the funding, then the space opens up to people that don't actually need the funding, that have families that can support them, that come from wealthy backgrounds. And that's not fixing anything.
Yeah.
The other thing, like you say, is introducing people to the ocean. And that's one of the motivations behind the business is, so it is a business. And the reason it's a business and not an NGO is because we've had bad experience with NGOs. We still want to do really cool stuff. We just don't want that to be the main focus. But and we work with a few NGOs, like See the Bigger Picture that Shamir is part of, and the Future Kids that are based here in Strand. And we want to get more kids into that environment, give them exposure not just to the environment, but to the science part of it, right? So marine science and the exploring part, give them a mask and a snorkel, make sure they're safe, and guide them through, every time they're excited or they have a question, be there to answer that.
Yeah.
Show them how they can move forward with it. After they leave that day, it mustn't end there. What can they do to still be part of it?
Sure.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think with that and with some of the amazing programs we've seen, like Shamir's See the Bigger Pictures, Defenders of the Blue program. There are a few other organizations, I think I Am Water, and, that take kids into these environments, kids that historically haven't been introduced to these environments and where there might be a history of fear.
Yeah. So I love everything that you're saying because I follow Shamir and I see like a lot of the work that he does. Like for me, that touches my heart so much because it talks to my upbringing as well. A place where, okay, but it's a bit different because they're a bit closer to the sea, but it's in a world where you could choose anything else. And he's saying, can I show you something? Can I show you the sea? And can I get you comfortable? And we all know that the minute you get to the sea and you get comfortable, she hooks you in. You are not going anywhere. You're going to love her for forever, and you'll always do whatever it is that she needs to ensure that her survival is everything. And I think that's the most important thing, because you create like this army of ocean advocates who start to care about the sea, and they will protect it, and they will, do everything. And even see the bigger picture. I think that's the most important thing. And I love that you guys in your business are saying, how do we meet this beautiful ocean love with the educational science part of it, so that the kids are like, is this what it means to be able to take a picture and I assume peg it against this? And that's what I want to see more of. And when I see movements like that, that's what inspires me to know that we are actually making a change. Because even when you live in Joburg, I think that's probably one of the things where, I'm going to schools and I'm talking about the ocean, and everyone is in Joburg and they're saying, but, what are you talking about? And I think
an intangible thing.
Hey?
It's an intangible thing almost.
It's an intangible thing, but there's a part of me that says we might be far from the sea, but we're still able to do the work. So getting comfortable in the pool and then going to play around at depth in a quarry, you might only be at 5-8 meters, but it makes the big body of water less scary. So whenever it is that you get to the sea, there's a curiosity, but also your heart is saying, could I do what I did in Joburg? Do you know what I mean? It's like you're eating a little bit into the fear and you're working into getting confident. But I also wanted to share, like, when you were saying getting more students in equals more funding, I feel like it goes back to the statement that I said earlier about ownership and authority when it comes to the ocean. Because
Yeah.
when you look at Black and brown stories, and this is when we talk about the disparity, where everyone might graduate at the same time, and the other one is either still paying back their fees, while the other one is traveling and getting to
Yeah.
sit up on their dives, and they become authority on the subject matter, but
Yeah.
the different challenges that we find ourselves in.
Yeah. I mean, a simple example is one of the students I know, a PhD student, and he's living off PhD funding, which it's enough. It's not a lot, but he is supporting his entire family on that PhD funding. And so he doesn't have parents, but he's got like 5 siblings, and he's supporting 5 siblings on PhD funding.
Yeah.
And then, his office mate, who is, so he's coming from a previously disadvantaged background. He's a Black student. Massive respect to him. He's such a cool guy, and he's such a hard worker. But his office mate, coming from a more privileged background, has no worries. Like, that money is theirs. They've got the car, they've got the house. And then, during the holiday, they can go off and do in a volunteer program, gain experience, because, they can afford to not earn that money during that time. And already 1 year later, you have the inequality, So yeah, things are changing, but we need support for students. We don't just need, okay, he got the funding, now what is he complaining about? Everything is fine. That guy, like, is supporting 6 people on that funding. Like, when he told me, my mind was blown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it echoes the point where you're saying, the disparity just grows because you graduate at the same time as peers, but the one gets to grow 100 times faster than the other.
Yes.
And in 5 years, the one can say, I've done 60 dives in 10 countries, and based on my experience, I want to deliver this, this massive memoir. And this guy has only just finished paying off the things that he needs to pay off, and he's only been to one place. He doesn't become authority in the space, but he's got the knowledge to be authority. So it's such a tricky thing.
So I was going to say, just in order, like, if they then qualify at the same time and they apply for the same job, immediately who's going to get it,
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that we need to be looking to address into how do we change the voices when it's ocean science facing. The Cyrene project says this is a very important point. Volunteering is a way for wealthy people to get ahead, something that needs to change within the industry, which is very, very good point. Requiring volunteer work in order to get paid positions isn't fair. Yeah, Miss Nasreen, thanks for the IG Live, lovely ladies, and the important conversation being had here. I'll catch the recording. Okay. And I think, Naz, for me, this is such an important thing. Like, I often think about it, when you say, like you said, when anyone looks at a resume, the one just has, I've qualified, and the other one says, I've qualified and I've worked in all of these countries, and I've
got all these additional skills. Yeah.
And I think that's something that we need to be looking, it's something that we need to be constantly looking at and constantly be thinking about. I often say, how do we open up the industry? How do we make it more accessible? Because the barriers will always be there for as long as finances are a prerequisite for someone to exist in a space, but also, the level, South Africa and its history means that we'll always have
For sure. The thing is that everyone is quick to say the government needs to do that, the funding bodies need to do that. But we as small business owners or, just general members of society, we have a duty as well. Like talking about getting people into the space. So like, you're a free dive instructor. Nelson is also a free dive instructor. And one of the things that was important for him is to have a, what is the word now? Like an income level cost right? So if you don't earn above a certain income level, then you pay cost price for the course, essentially. And that's his way then of making that more accessible. And it's not a lot. He's not
Yeah.
like, saving dozens of lives, but it's the small things that we do that make a difference. And if every one of us did something small, we'd be building a community, we'd be uplifting each other until we're on the same level,
Yeah. And I completely agree with you. Stephanie's come in to say, I love everything about this dialogue. Privilege runs so deep and has so many nuances regarding postgraduate experience, opportunity, and what different students are able to take on or prioritize, which is so true, right? Because what do you
Yes.
prioritize, livelihood or travel? And that's always the trick,
Yeah.
and that's always the question. Tell us about community-based conservation. What does that mean?
Right. So often, and I was raised with this, where conservation is like a save the whales kind of thing. We need to go and teach people, it's like not eating fish. It's, never buying plastic. Don't buy plastic. I'm not saying like buy plastic unnecessarily, but like you since realize that conservation is so much more complex than that. And in South Africa, we are used to national parks, right? And that's our idea of conservation, is you have a space, you cut it off to the public. Public is not allowed to use it in any way. They can only enter some areas if they pay, and that is conservation. But that's not how it works in many countries around the world. In many countries where people live off the land, where people live closely with the land, where their livelihoods depend on it, they've been conserving for generations and centuries, and they've built up such vast reserves of traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge, if you will. And the conservation practices are now based on that knowledge. So they know that for example, if it doesn't rain that much this winter, then we can't take so many fish from the sea. I'm obviously generalizing a lot, and it depends a lot on different communities and different areas and the rules of or the laws of the country and the support from the government as well. But generally, if you want to reduce that conflict between communities and conservation authorities, then it's better to see what communities are already doing. That's community-based conservation, and build from there. So like we have a lot of conflict, for example, with poachers. And I use the word poachers because I don't like that word. Often it's people that used to live off the land and have now been cut off from the area. So even though sometimes what they're doing is illegal, it shouldn't be. It's a very complicated situation. But in South Africa, we have that a lot, both with rhinos and with abalone, right? And we have that huge conflict, and that was caused by removing, removing people from the area, forced removals. I think in Hout Bay now, things are getting quite bad, and that's been quite an ongoing story, the removal from the sea. But when I think of Mozambique, people don't conserve by removing communities. They conserve with communities. So they help them, and that is like part of what we'd like to do, or what we're hoping to achieve with this project, is communities have questions. They say, okay, is this working? And we as scientists, we have the tools to answer those questions, right? And we can assist in that way. We don't come in and teach and say, this is how it works, this is what you need to do. You can't fish anymore, go take up a different trade. We answer the questions that they have to strengthen their conservation initiatives.
Sure.
That makes sense, yeah.
So everything that you've just said is like heart on heart on heart. Like everyone is just sending you hearts. And so I'm with you, right? So obviously, like I've said before, me and the sea, we're still in our baby part of the love, where we're still new. We're less than 10 years, so we're still new to each other, and we're still like super fascinated with each other. But every single time we travel, be it to Cape Town or to Durban, and there'll always be a moment where the question of conservation and livelihood meet each other, right? And then someone will say, that guy's not allowed to be fishing there because right? Or fishing hours are only between 8 and 3, or there's always someone who's trying to say
Yes.
why the local community cannot be benefiting from
Yeah.
their own natural resource. And for me, that's always been a thing with my friends, where I stop and I say, but hold on, who do these laws benefit? What if this guy has to be at work? What if this guy is at work from 6 till 6, and whenever the fishing time is open, he's not able to be there to provide for his family? Where are we opening up the space to say we're protecting communities while conserving the ocean, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I almost feel like it's always such a hard dance, because we're saying, you know, and the ocean is always looking to provide for its people, and its people will protect her. And then someone walks in and says conservation has to look like this, it has to be rigid in that way, almost taking away from communities. And it almost feels like you could say it feels like it's repetitive when it comes to South Africa, where, you know, people have to be moved, and people have to be moved, and natural resources first, but also could natural resources and people in our planning, could we put them together?
I've learnt a few years ago that our park models, like our national park models, are actually based on an American model. And what happened is, back in the 19th century, or whenever, the 17th century, whenever it happened, was that we would get hunters, right, in Southern Africa, and a lot of American hunters. And they brought the idea of national parks so that they could improve conservation whilst also preserving hunting stock.
Yeah.
And we have continued to use this model, and it's only very recently that it's changing, you know, that we're beginning to consult with communities. But still, I think we're at a very superficial level of consultation. When I look at examples around the world, a lot of Southeast Asian park models, some South American park models, other African systems, we have not yet reached it. Hey, like, we have a long way to go. We have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
But hopefully it will change. It's just that we mustn't now inherit that point of view that national parks are gold. They're not.
Yeah.
You know, it's again a colonial system that we've inherited,
Yeah.
and that needs to change fundamentally.
I completely, like, high five what you're saying times 100. And it reminds me of something that I heard this morning from Tanya, where she said that she was part of her research was looking at how the communities that live around the ocean had existed. Like, when she spoke about that, for me that was important, because I often say that our knowledge base can be lots of theory, but the people who might not be academic have a knowledge that is such gold, because it's so raw, and it tells of a next level connection to the ocean and to the environment. And that just means that they always know when what is what.
Yes, yeah.
I see the Cyrene Le Anemone says they have the same dilemma in Barbados. And the Cyrene Project says, quote by the UN, women are engaged in all aspects of ocean interactions, yet their voices are often missing at the decision-making level, which is so true. And we need to change that. We need to diversify spaces. And then she goes on to say, is there a part in your organization where you particularly try to foster young women or girls and ocean conservationists?
Right. So with the research that we do, it's an interesting question, because the fisheries community and the fisheries council is largely male dominated. And it is something that we try to account for. So in our last set of interviews, we tried to get as many women as possible. I'd say they account for like 25% of the total interview, the number of people that we interviewed. Women in certain communities are a lot more quiet, and I always am hesitant to push for it, because there needs to be a certain level of respecting community dynamics. You know, even though we feel like women and men need to speak equally, like, I can't impose that on certain communities just because, from my point of view, it's correct. With regards to actually getting people interested in terms of in South Africa, so like with the business, we haven't yet had a reason to push more for female. We've always had fairly equal tours, fairly equal groups. We haven't had a lot, but it is definitely something that we keep an eye on. With the funding bodies that we use for research in South Africa or for business, a lot of them are also focused on gender representation, where they award like a certain percentage to females and less to males, which is another way that they've helped to, improve representation in terms of gender. Yeah. But I was reading a very interesting article that just came out a couple of days ago about a study done on female fishers in, I think it was in Timor-Leste, and the amount that they contribute and the knowledge that they actually have in that environment, and how often the focus is placed on the male fishers, but females hold a different type of knowledge because they're the ones in the coastal, like on land, right? So they're harvesting the clams and they're in the very shallow water, and they might be diving for like some shallow water species while the males are further off. So by ignoring the females, you're actually ignoring that whole section of the coast and all that knowledge.
Sure.
So yeah.
So I think we're coming towards a close. The Cyrene project, I hope your question was answered. I have to ask you a controversial question. It's a little bit controversial, but I think it's good fun. Obviously,
I like controversy.
In the height of looking at, Black Lives Matter and the whole situation that's unfolding in America, in looking at some of your stories, you've actually stopped to say brown people can also be allies for Black people because, let you explain. Tell us about that and your position, where you come from and what that means.
Yeah. I'll speak about my own community. I know a lot of other brown people have a similar experience or have written to me about their experiences, but I can't speak on that. Where I come from, in Durban, the brown community or the Indian community is very quick to jump on bandwagons. We're quite conservative. We like to, cry apartheid when things are tough. We like to cry racist things when our houses are being broken into, So we like to hop on bandwagons, and we play a huge role, huger than we think, in perpetuating racist stereotypes. And for me, with this whole Black Lives Matter thing, all of a sudden, I don't know what it is about the USA that why when something happens there, suddenly it's fashionable. These are issues we've been having for a long time. Whether it's police violence, whether it's racism, whether it's race-related, killings, etc. But all of a sudden, people were sharing Black posts and hashtag BLM, and I'm like, like you have a domestic worker and you like barely pay her minimum wage and you complain about her in front of her, and like she's eating but she's not allowed to use your utensils, she's not allowed to sit at the table, she must eat in the kitchen on the floor with her own set of cutlery. It's heartbreaking. But now you're sharing BLM, hashtag BLM. Look at yourself, like look at your own home. You are raising children with this, you're raising grandchildren in this home. What are you teaching them? It's easy to come onto social media and post things that are fashionable or acceptable. It's not easy to look at ourselves. And, myself as well. Like often in my interactions, I'm like, how can I do better? How can I be better? I was raised by very, what's the word? My parents were quite the activists, right? Yeah. They were very anti-racist. They fought in our school systems. I went to an ex-Model C school, like relentlessly to, have things equalized and for representation. And, I didn't understand it as a kid, right? Yeah. But now I do. And I was raised with that. And, it doesn't make sense to me. But even though I was raised with that, you still find, you know, we are human. We have our biases. We can't help it. It's biological. But it means that you constantly have to question yourself. You constantly have to check, okay, did I do this with good intentions? Why did I do this? Why did I say this? Why am I posting this? Don't just post things because they're cool or because you want to show support. You know, rather don't show the support and do the work. You know, I'd rather like privately support you and Zuleka and, you know, like people that need the support rather than post about it publicly. Yeah.
Naz, I think like it's such an important thing because I mean, I ask you about it because, you know, there's hinted subtleties where you'll see like the weirdness. And obviously with South Africa having, with apartheid South Africa having broken people down, there was a little bit of a hierarchy. So black spaces have always been like at the bottom level. And to see you say, hey, you know, as brown people, can we actually, instead of jumping on a bandwagon to support America, how can we do better with ourselves? You know, when we go and pray and when we go and worship, let's also place ourselves in that prayer, which is what you're saying right now. You're saying
100%,
in whatever it is that you post, are you also doing that work? You know, rather don't post anything. Do the work with yourself and in yourself instead of just jumping on a bandwagon because you can.
For sure. It's uncomfortable. You feel icky. You feel terrible, but you grow from it, right? The point is not to feel bad and to stay there. It's to grow, right?
And so I see Stephanie says she loves that we went into this discussion. There's the Cyrene Project that says, thank you for the conversation. Zolega says, Naz! You're the first brown person to vocalize how brown people can perpetuate stereotypes.
No way.
You're my soul sister. And
Zolega.
She's out here. She's out here sending you some serious love.
Yeah.
Shamir says, just to touch on young girls getting in on conversation, on conservation, I can say proudly, I see more girls interested in our programs than the boys, so the future looks great. Faye Ray says, Naz, your brain is amazing, which is, we all agree. Rosalind says, yes, everyone seems to say whatever they need for the likes. With the monkey covering face, and I'm 100% with that. The whole world is living on likes versus authenticity. Zolega says, I have a newfound respect and love for you. We get our weekend retreat? And everybody is just sending love, 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 love. Megan's sending fire. And that's why it's important to tackle these apartheid hierarchies when we are advocating for diversity and transformation. I think that statement, for me, summarizes our conversation, right? It says we're looking back at what apartheid handed South Africa, and the question is, how can we change it in our lifetime, right? As we advocate for diversity and we advocate for transformation, how can we actively say organizations are not just ticking boxes? You know, are we in the transformation, are we fully allowing the beautiful brains that are diverse, that are coming into the space, are we allowing them to shine and to actually share the richness of diverse minds?
I always say it's like, you know, as South Africans, we often tend to think that we can slap a Rainbow Nation band-aid on the whole thing and it's fixed. And it's not. You have a gaping, festering wound that you need to put alcohol into and burn the heck out of, you know, before you can start healing. And we've yet, in our 26 years of democracy, we've yet to pour alcohol on that thing, you know. But it feels like it's coming.
Yeah.
It feels like it's coming.
And it is coming. And I actually love that you say that we still haven't put the alcohol on it to properly feel and be present with each other, because the healing work is for everybody, right? So I often say, both in Black, brown, and white spaces, everybody has a healing that they have to go through from the time. It's not just one or the other. And I love that we're having these conversations where One, we're talking about women who are in ocean sciences, who are projecting their voices in spaces to change narratives, like yourself. You're standing in a space to bridge the gap, to say we can do better, and I'm gonna stay in academia because I need to see this happen. I need to do my work in the space, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
That I
So
start.
as we close, tell us anything you want us to think about, anything you want to share that's in your heart. Let's close with you.
I'm grateful. Honestly, that's the overwhelming feeling. Is the last few months it's been tough, but and now it's winter, it's even tougher. But I'm so grateful that I think the lockdown, and it started, we started doing the lives at the beginning of lockdown, and that helped us to connect to so many people on such a different level, where you're actually sitting face to face and having a conversation. You're not just hanging out or busy on your phone or doing something else together, you're talking. And I'm grateful for those connections. I'm grateful for all the comments and all the feedback that people have given us. I'm grateful for the people like you that have given us space, to talk about these things.
Yeah.
So overwhelming emotion is just gratitude. And thank you so much for having me as well.
I love this so much, and I echo what you're saying. The overwhelming space is gratitude. And I think just the reminder that the things that we are thankful for, they multiply, right? So we could sit in the sadness and we could sit in the ugly, but we could also find space to be thankful for what is, and to change whatever it is that we don't like you guys opening up conversation. So as we come to a close, Naz, thank you so much for chatting to us and teaching us and reminding us that we are all doing our work as we walk in the world and whatever it is that we're doing. I'm encouraged by you and I'm thankful for your soul. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. And I can't wait for you to come to Cape Town. See you soon.
Soon. Cheers. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, guys, for the comments and questions.
Absolutely. Cheers.